On today's edition of the show, we bring back the public address voice of the Florida Panthers, Andrew Imber, for a little bit of a vibe check. We get Andrew Imber's feelings on the Panthers making the Stanley Cup Final. We go over the Stanley Cup Final schedule, and is there a possible watch party for the Florida Panthers for Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final? We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, May 29th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez. You can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers and on Instagram as well at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And what a time once again. We are officially in preparation for the Stanley Cup Final. And it's been a little bit since we've had this guest on the show, but now we're bringing him in to the show to discuss a vibe check. That's what this episode is about, a vibe check on the Florida Panthers making it. And who better, the guy who brings all the vibes to the in-arena experience of the Florida Panthers. He is Mr. Andrew Imber. Andrew, welcome back to Locked On Panthers.
It is unbelievable to be here, my friend.
Most definitely, and very thankful for you to be here. And I want to just get your feelings on the Panthers making it this far from when Game 4 happened against the Boston Bruins at home. The only games that I was in the building for in this playoff run were Games 4 and 6 of round 1, and I remember how devastated I was when the Florida Panthers went down 3-1 at that point. And then, of course, the forcing of the Game 7. But you obviously have been there through it all with the home games and, of course, the watch parties as well. And we'll get more into watch parties in the third segment here. But just go over like how you're feeling, and, of course, all the photos that you've posted of yourself from you growing up as a fan to now to be this team being back in the Stanley Cup Final.
Yeah, it's just the most unbelievable feeling. I mean, it's funny, right? I mean, we've talked about this to death, but everyone thought that last year was the year. We got the President's Trophy. The team looked like an unstoppable machine. And then all of a sudden the playoffs start and everyone realizes it's just a bit of a different animal. So to go from that to this year where the expectations were lower, and to see the performance that the Panthers have put on this year in the playoffs, it's like a completely different team. They're ready. Obviously, one could say that last year they learned some decent lessons, and now it's just a different team, different coach, different system, and it's all working for them at the same time. And it's just been, I mean, like you said, leaving the stadium after Game 4, dropping both on home ice against Boston, the percentages were not with us at that point. And to go from that to just sitting here waiting for our opponent in the Stanley Cup Final is just, it's a dream come true for me, for the fans, for the team. I'm on cloud 9.
Absolutely. And I'm also on cloud 9 as well, because I hadn't experienced even a playoff series win until last year. And of course we spoke all about how no adversity or barely any adversity for the Panthers last year when they did win the President's Trophy, and then having to go through the adversity this year. And it proved to be such a blessing in disguise. And of course, learning how to win, and of course, getting healthy at the right time as well for this team. One question I do have for you is, when Matthew Tkachuk scored in Game 4 against the Carolina Hurricanes, of course, the celly that he had sliding on his knees, but not only, this is a two-parter actually, is how do you go from celebrating in your box to also having to kind of parent the arena when people started throwing the rats on the ice a little early? Because of course, you get so caught up in the moment, your adrenaline is going, but then, of course, having to say, oh, I still have to kind of do my job and say, hey, please refrain from throwing rats on the ice until the conclusion of the game.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a couple of moments like that late in the regular season and then into the playoffs where I went from, you're watching professionally, obviously cheering as a fan also, to celebrating at an insane clip at that moment where you're just like the roof blows off and you're part of the celebration, you're dancing, you're jumping up and down with other employees up there. And then you have to kind of bring yourself back into it. There was actually one call I made, I forget when it was. I think it was during round 1, possibly maybe game 6, where I literally made the call standing up. I had people holding me back and I had to run and grab the microphone and like pull it back to my face and make the call standing up because we were just celebrating in that moment. And so there have been a couple of moments just like that where it's like you're trying to walk that fine line between being such a lifetime diehard fan and doing the job. So yeah, I mean, when Tkachuk scores that goal, the roof blows off. Our roof blows off upstairs. It was the craziest celebration I've ever had in that area. And then to go from that, and it's like, okay, like we celebrated for 20, 30 seconds, and then I sat down. I have to start writing the time of the goal. I have to make sure I'm ready to say, please stop throwing things on the ice. Just, you have to do that. And then to be ready for the goal call into the script and the text that came after that. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to be a diehard, and on the inside, you're just jumping for joy. But on the outside, you have to kind of, after the celebration, you have to make sure you're keeping it together, because there were some really important reads after that too, where I had to make sure I was on key, on point, and nailed them, because the whole world was watching at that point.
Yeah, and especially with the fact that not every regular season game they have you doing they don't always televise the pregame stuff of, especially before the national anthem. So I'm sure you're well aware of that you are on TV, and then you hear Kenny Albert say, and now here for the public address voice of the Florida Panthers, Andrew Imber. So it's a little bit of a different feel when that the world is watching, just like you said, and especially with introducing the person who's banging the drum as well in that situation as well. And so everything is going on at once, and to collect yourself and center, especially that must be very difficult as well. But I do want to discuss more in segment number 2, the Stanley Cup Final schedule, now that we have a official schedule, even though we don't know an opponent yet. And I want to discuss with you in segment number 2, how antsy are you for Game 3? We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about eBay Motors. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure that every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that your part will fit or your money back. Just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors, and with over 122 parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, right fit, the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride! eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Segment number 2 here on this Monday, May 29th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is a vibe check edition of the show with the public address voice of the Florida Panthers, Andrew Imber. And we have officially a schedule now. Of course, there was 2 versions of it depending on what was going to go on in Vegas versus Dallas. And of course, the Dallas Stars did end up beating the Vegas Golden Knights by a final score of 4-2 on Saturday night. I was at a bar on Saturday watching both the Heat game and Dallas VGK split screen, so able to keep eyes on both of them. Of course, we're hoping for the Heat to get it done in Game 7 on Monday night, so that they can also advance this to the NBA Finals. And Game 1, June 3rd. Game 2, June 5th. Both of them on the road. Game 3 on Thursday, June 8th. Game 4, June 10th. Game 5 in Vegas, June 13th. Game 6, possible Game 6 Friday at FLA Live Arena, June 16th on Friday. And then a possible Game 7 will be June 19th on Monday. And the question I have for you, Andrew, is, of course, the Florida Panthers haven't had home ice advantage and throughout this whole playoff run. But how antsy are you to get to Game 3?
Yeah, very. I mean, at this point, I'm antsy to get to Game 1. I mean, let's face it, we still have a ways just to get the series started. I'm ready because, the watch party, which we'll get to later, is actually in the arena for Game 1. So we're really excited about that. But yeah, I mean, I know from watching previous years, unless things have changed, that they throw to the PA announcer very early on Stanley Cup games, and you're introducing both teams. It's huge. The grandeur is ratcheted way up, and so I'm chomping at the bit for sure. But I just really want the series to get started. I think the hardest part may actually be how much time is between games, because there's that one day off when there's the 2 home games on each side. But other than that, there's an extra day off between each game. And that may end up being a disadvantage because the Panthers are going to have such huge rest compared to their opponent. I almost wish it was like kind of a rapid fire series, but I know when the finals come around, it's pretty commonplace for there to be more days off in between.
Yeah, and also they don't want to conflict with the NBA finals. Regardless of whether the Panthers and the Heat are both in it, they don't want to conflict their fans. So even on off days for NBA fans, they're watching hockey, and off days for hockey fans, they're watching the NBA finals and all that. So we won't have to worry about the Miami Heat and the Florida Panthers conflicting at all the rest of the way. They'll always play on separate days as well. I do want to quickly ask you about. I was in the building for the All-Star game. You had an opportunity to be, of course, be part of the PA festivities there. But of course, they had 2 different types of. It was a little bit different the way your normal game would be. They would have at least the way I heard it, they would have the guy who would say it on the TV feed, and then you as the in arena. How was that as far? Can you explain as far as the rehearsal tactics of it, and also when you knew that you were going to be speaking versus the other person?
Yeah, I mean, it's new-ish. A number of years ago, I guess the league decided that they wanted a uniformed voice for big events. So they went with Al Murdoch, the Vancouver Canucks public address announcer, one of the best in the business, for everything from all-star festivity games to outdoor games to global series sometimes. He's kind of like the go-to voice for these events. But they also learned very quickly that if you tried to replace the home team PA announcer, there was some backlash. So they kind of settled on a compromise where Al handles the big stuff on television, introducing rosters for stuff like the All-Star game. And they still allow the home team's PA announcer to do like the actual starting lineup in the arena, the goal calls, the penalties, all the actual game stuff. And then he usually does stuff like marketing reads and stuff like that. So it was very clear throughout scripting and stuff who was going when. And it was actually a lot of fun. Al's a friend of mine. I've called him for advice over the years, just in the industry and in voice stuff in general. He's a great guy. He's a testament to the business. And it was really fun to get to meet and hang out with him for a few days.
That's awesome, and of course, the fact that you get to be next to him as well, and of course, knowing when you're on cue to go as well, and of course, it was so much fun, especially when I believe hyping people up for like the fastest skater or even the hardest shot as well is like, come on, Panther fans, make some. But also, was it also a little weird for you having to announce goals for like other teams as well that you're just not used to?
Well, I mean, the whole thing was a little bit out of my comfort zone for sure. I mean, especially during what you're saying, the skills night, my role was almost more of an MC. I was kind of like the host, trying to get people hyped for, let's help this guy go for the fastest time of the night skating. So it was really outside of my comfort zone for sure. But it was a great experience. I like to build in other ways, and I got a lot of good feedback that night. But yeah, for sure, announcing goals kind of like from other teams, but also in a semi-excited way. Like there was a goal, it was like Crosby from Ovechkin. And I was like, that's different. to kind of get the hype behind their name and stuff like that. It was a fun experience, though. I will admit, I thought that at the time that was going to be the most fun event that I called this season, and I was very wrong.
And the best is yet to come, isn't it? Huh? So, did you happen to see Matthew Tkachuk's appearance on the NBA on TNT Saturday night?
Yes.
For those of you who are not into basketball, for the listeners, Matthew Tkachuk appeared on the Inside the NBA set with Charles Barkley, Shaq, Kenny the Jet Smith, and Ernie Johnson, and he was wearing a very iconic a shirt of a very iconic restaurant in Fort Lauderdale. I actually never been to the Elbow Room, but I did pass by it during the All-Star weekend, and also during Odyssey Beach Fest when it came to South Florida. But also the relation between the two teams, and also the fact that Charles Barkley as well is hyping up hockey, South Florida, even might upset Keith Tkachuk saying that Matthew is better and all that stuff. How do you view how this team is marketed based on its current run?
I mean, that's huge, right? Because the one thing the NBA does better than any sport, honestly, is that panel. That panel of personalities is the best. You can't touch Charles, Shaq, EJ, and Kenny. They're hilarious. They're insightful. They do great games. They just have a great. There were times, honestly, in years past where I would watch playoff hockey and then switch over to the NBA postgame, even though I hadn't watched any games, because it was just so entertaining over there. So for them to kind of cross over to this point and get into Matthew Tkachuk, get into the Panthers. I forget how Charles said his name, but Bobka or whatever in goal. That
Sergei Bababka.
Yeah, chocolate Bobka, just like Seinfeld, So it was really it's huge, honestly. Like, hockey obviously has still a little bit of growing to do in America, and for us to be leading the charge now behind some of that as we get to the finals, like that's the best, right? I mean, that's an absolute dream come true. And I mean, in a larger capacity, a run like this is just going to be huge for the organization as a whole. I mean, I know that countless fans that we have today were created by 1996. So you can only imagine how many more are being created right now of all ages, all generations. The watch parties have only been increasing in size, and the hype around the city, banners, flags, it's just been getting more and more intense, and I think it's just going to continue. And the Panthers have had a chance to create diehards for life, and they'll have a few more chances here over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and just yesterday when going to see the games, the Dallas Stars VGK game and Heat Celtics, I was wearing my Panthers hat. I wear it quite often when I go out and about. Never do I hear a Go Cats in where I'm located in Orlando, and I've heard it more times in the last week than I have in the last 3 years of hosting this show, and even prior to that, and even in places in South Florida that have also a big Hispanic influence, of course, a sport that doesn't really interest them as much, if we're being honest. The times that I've gone back to South Florida throughout this playoff run, people are talking about this team, and it just goes to show when you create a product that's winning, people are going to talk about it. I'm sure the shirt that you're wearing, the one that you're wearing right now, if you guys happen to be watching this on YouTube, how many have you lost count of the amount of Go Cats chants that you've gotten just by going to like the grocery store?
Yeah. I mean, it's the hype is unreal. It's clearly become infectious for sure. And no, I mean, you're absolutely right. Now compared to what it was even a few months ago, people are watching, people are paying attention, and I completely stand by that they're going to be fans in the building for the next decades just based on this run.
No doubt. And season ticket holders, they're gonna increase. So the attendance jokes that a lot of people like to say about the Panthers, it's been put to rest. But we could even put it even more to rest for sure. Let's transition over to segment number 3. We're going to talk about watch party for game 1. We're actually going to go over a few practice notes from just quickly go over some practice notes from Saturday night, and then talk about, of course, the watch party for game 1 on Saturday. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Monday, May 29th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is a special vibe check edition of the show where I have the PA announcer of the Florida Panthers, Andrew Imber, here on the show. So a few practice notes from Saturday. The Panthers did not practice on Sunday. There was 3 players who were not in attendance for practice, but looks to be maintenance days for 2. Nick Cousins and Matthew Tkachuk were the only ones missing, and one more to add, Etu, who took that block shot in game 4 in the middle of the second period. Paul Maurice did say that he is in fact okay, so just precautionary measure. Of course, we saw what happened with Barkov in game 3 as well, but so the Panthers, they continued to, knock on wood, great health here throughout the playoff run for them. Also, one thing that I forgot to add, Imber, regardless of what the result of what happens in the Stanley Cup Final, can you imagine how many more nationally televised games the Florida Panthers are going to have next season?
Yeah, this goes a long way towards building respect, right? I mean, you got to win. You got to win consistently. And not only that, you got to go on some deep runs. And that's the one thing that's kind of the big main ingredient that's been missing over the last number of years. Because, the Panthers have become a very solid franchise. They made the playoffs a number of years in a row now. They're building that winning tradition. And but you got to get a little further, too. You can't be that first-round doormat that a number of teams have acquired the reputation for over the years. And that's not the case here right now. And it's, as you said, you go to the championship, the next year you're going to get some nationally televised games. So, and that continues to build the brand and bring more awareness to the team. So it's all coming up aces right now.
I think of one team, a team that even got a Stadium Series game after making a run to the Stanley Cup Final. They didn't win. I think of the Nashville Predators. I know geographically, as far as temperature, is a little different between South Florida and Nashville, but there has been talk, rumors for years about a Stadium Series game. There's a recent rumor about MetLife Stadium having a 2 Stadium Series games between the Flyers, Devils, Islanders, and Rangers. That's going to happen next year. But also, there is going to be that chance. I don't know if it's going to be home or road. We don't know yet. But there could be a possibility that Lone Depot Park could be that site for a Stadium Series game for a possible Battle of Florida sometime down the road. Can you just imagine being at Lone Depot Park calling a Stadium Series game, regardless of weather, regardless of having to close the roof or the panels in left center field open? Can you imagine yourself, because of what the Florida Panthers are doing now, of the possibility that you get to be behind the microphone in that kind of setting?
It would be great for everybody. I mean, let's face it, when the outdoor games started, it was the coolest thing ever. I would block out my schedule. I would make sure I was watching the snowfall, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, and some of those opening type games. And it became an annual tradition. Like, oh, we got to watch this outdoor game. It's cool. And let's face it, I mean, it has kind of, been a little monotonous at this point, whether it's too many games or whether it's the same teams over and over again. Like, people want to see different things. And so you can't just have Boston and Pittsburgh play every year. You can't just have Philly and the Rangers play every single year. You can't just have, the same teams over and over again. So I don't think it's just great for someone like me who would obviously relish the opportunity. I think it's great for the league because it's time to expand to some of these other markets to show that there is attention from some of these other areas. and let us show what we can do for once, because I think that, that's the only way the game truly grows to a national perspective, is when everybody gets to take part and it's not just the same teams every year. So yeah, it would be an absolutely amazing opportunity.
No doubt. And 3 teams still have not had an outdoor game. The Florida Panthers are one of them. The Arizona Coyotes are the other. And this one is a more surprising one. The Columbus Blue Jackets, who play in a place that has snow. And can you imagine Ohio State's football stadium having an outdoor game? I think that would be such a cool place to have a game there too. But Imber, it has been officially announced, at least for Game 1, that the Florida Panthers will be having a watch party on Saturday night, June 3rd, for their first game of the Stanley Cup Final against either Vegas or Dallas. We still don't know the result of that series yet. It's going to a Game 6 on Monday night. But how excited are you to be in the arena on Monday night? And also talk about how the different types of vibes that the different watch parties the different locations. I the only place I have been to in the past has been Funky Buddha Brewery in Oakland Park. Talk about the different experiences in the different places as well from your lens.
Yeah, I mean, the watch parties have been amazing. Funky Buddha is a cool location, but we've had some really, really nice events at Backyard, and the whole, like, we shut down 3rd Street out there in Fort Lauderdale and kind of did a block party for a couple of them, especially in that last round. That 4 overtime game was just crazy. And I'll just drop this story since we're on the subject of watch parties. I don't know if everyone saw my tweet, but legitimately about 5 minutes before the Panthers won that 4 overtime game, a real live rat ran past us in the back room. And again, people were like, "Oh, you can't put a restaurant on blast." This is not a restaurant. We were nowhere near food. This was not a restaurant, so don't go crazy with the health stuff. This was in the back of like a concert hall and like all out in the dust and all that. We're watching this game behind the scenes, and legitimately in quadruple overtime, a real rat runs by the room, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous. This is a sign, right? I mean, this is crazy.
It's luck.
They won 5 minutes later. So, I mean, that was just one of, a few signs I've seen throughout the playoffs. But the vibe has been unreal. Shout outs to all the Panthers fans who've come through. We've put on parties everywhere. I'm really excited to see what we do in the arena. I hope that I can still kind of have more of that interactiveness that I had, because that's one of the things that I really love during these watch parties. I'm right there with the fans. We play games. They come up on stage. I'm interacting right there with them. I hope that we're able to still kind of bring that vibe to the arena, because that's just, I don't want to be hidden away like I am during the games. I want to be right up there and have a chance to kind of talk with people and stuff like that. So, but I'm really excited. People have been clamoring for it since the beginning, and I'm really excited to see what we do in the arena with these.
And I tweeted this earlier, but there's nothing scheduled for Game 2, Game 5, and a possible Game 7. There's a few events the day before. So, but even though there's nothing officially announced, I tweeted that there is a very, very good chance that we could see a watch party every single time throughout for all the road games throughout the Stanley Cup Final, and a little bit of details for the watch party if you guys are interested in going on Saturday night, June 3rd. $10 benefiting the Florida Panthers Foundation. Parking is included, and it's general admission, so you don't have to worry about assigned seating, buying your tickets together if you want to sit with your friends like a typical game. And Pantherland will be open, and the concession stand will be open, so you don't have to worry about food and all that, and you'll have it right there. And of course, with planning, we also got to consider the operation cost of it too when trying to plan these type of things, because people got to work these events too who are employees of the arena. So credit to the people who are working this event too. I want to give a special shout out to those people for sure. But one thing I hope is that they have like a little bit of a carpet for you in the middle of the ice for maybe some chairs as well for you to stand, or maybe they'll have you kind of towards like where near the drum is. I do you have any idea before we sign off where you'll happen to be, or any guesses by any chance?
Not a clue. I would imagine it would either be on like the 109 stage, as you're saying, by where that drum area is, or back where I normally am in the PA booth upstairs in the press box. But I would much rather be kind of in that atmosphere. So I will certainly be pushing to try to be lower down and more in an interactive role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm assuming because it's not an official home game, they won't. I think they would find a way to have you lower with the fans. That's for sure. And of course, definitely one. Hopefully, as the Panthers as this series extends and there's more watch parties that we could pack all 20,000 seats in that arena just cheering loud for the Panthers again, hopefully we have people also traveling to the games, whether it's in Vegas or Dallas, to see the Florida Panthers hopefully steal home ice advantage to start the Stanley Cup Final. But Andrew, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, getting a vibe check here when it comes to the Florida Panthers making the Stanley Cup Final, your feelings about it, and you, of course, the antsiness to just get to Game 3. So for people who want to follow you, where can they follow you online?
I try to make it as simple as possible. I'm at Imber Voice, IMBER Voice. Primarily use Twitter, Instagram, and actually Twitch to play some games every now and then. I'm sure over the summer we'll be doing a lot of that. And, you can find me wherever else at that Ember Voice. You could check, I don't know, MySpace, all those old ones. See if you can find me somewhere.
I'm sure he's somewhere out there as well. So awesome, Andrew. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time, my friend.
Thanks for having me, my friend.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And everydayers, make sure to come back on Wednesday for Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where it'll be a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, where we bring back Jacob Winans and prepare for Game 1. Who knows? We might have an opponent now by the time Wednesday comes around. So make sure to come back on Wednesday for then. So I'm Armando Velez with Andrew Imber, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.